to talk. Thanks,
Adam. We're going to immediately go into our next panel. And again, Q&A, I think we'll need to do that probably face-to-face. And we want to get back on schedule. And, so our next panel is around buildings, energy efficiency, low carbon, smart buildings. So we've got 3 great speakers for you. Alejandro will introduce them.
Up next is Bruce King, Director, Ecological Building Network, structural engineer and author. Bruce is a registered structural engineer with 30 years of private consulting experience, 25 years of leadership in the green building movement. He has served as a green clean tech advisor to numerous startups and other organizations. He's worked on high-rise structures in San Francisco, aircraft remodeling in Miami, Tahitian resorts, Buddhist monasteries in the Colorado Rockies, and passive solar designs all over the world. He is founder and director of the Ecological Building Network and author of Buildings of Earth and Straw Making Better Concrete and Design of Straw Bale Buildings. And most recently, The New Carbon Architecture. And he lives here in Marin.
And I know David Warner.
I'm sitting with Bruce to give him help.
Right. Sure. David Warner, accompanying us, is CEO at Redhorse Constructors. David co-founded the Human Needs Project with Connie Nielsen in 2010 to bring new level of quality water and sanitation services to a Kibera slum in Kenya via a state-of-the-art facility built with local labor forces at the highest construction standards. A UC Berkeley alum, go Bears. David is a board member of the College of Natural Resources at his alma mater. He founded Redhorse Constructors 25 years ago in Northern California and was Custom Builder of the Year in 2007. His company built Metallica's headquarters in San Rafael and has also done work for Huey Lewis, Sammy Hagar, Joe Satriani, and Green Day. Born in Marin and raised in Larkspur, Warner now lives in my favorite town, Fairfax, with his family.
All right. You want to stand here?
Okay.
You can use this mic if you want.
That is better.
It's probably.
So, I thought we might be running short of time, so I'm keeping mine short, and I'm going to give you a 2-hour talk in about 10 minutes, and I'll just try to talk really fast and get through it. And get the self-promotion over with from the beginning. This is my most recent book, and it's a journalistic effort. It's the first that I've written that wasn't really for the building community, but for you, for everybody. Because in my work over the last quarter of a century, traveling around the world and meeting interesting people, I began to realize that this very cool thing was emerging, and I wanted to report about it. Namely that for all the talk about net zero buildings and reducing the operating emissions of buildings, what we actually built them with was a problem. And we could flip that problem into a solution by turning the built environment into a carbon sink. By building with carbon in ways that were not even possible 10 years ago. Most notably, behind the back, I like that. That's the one, right? There we go. Mass timber construction. Starting in World War II, we started making plywood. In the 50s and 60s, we were making glued laminated beams. You've maybe seen them. Now we're making whole slabs for buildings out of wood, so that now you can build urban buildings, large, complicated, 10, 12, 20, 30 stories high, entirely out of wood. Where formerly it was all steel and concrete, which are extremely carbon-intensive materials. This is a huge thing. It's taking off like crazy all over the world. Plants are being built all over the West right now of this so-called cross-laminated timber. Imagine plywood on steroids, and you get floor slabs that are this thick, and they're solid wood. And you're sequestering the carbon in your building and getting a really lovely building in the deal. The opportunity for us is that all over the West, there's a whole bunch of beetle-killed pine, which is a fire hazard. It's not so great for the ecology, and if we could go in and harvest those trees, we need something to do with them. Burning them up for energy doesn't sound like such a great idea. It's not an attractive wood, so it's hard to make things that people are going to look at. People do. There's lots of companies making furniture and so on, but You could put these things in these cross-laminated timber panels and make large buildings, and if you didn't want to look at it, you wouldn't have to. They'd be hidden inside the slab and covered by Doug fir or something. So there's a huge opportunity. There are CLT plants now all over the West, but none as yet in California. Maybe there's one on a drawing board somewhere that I don't know about, but one in Sacramento would be a real boon for us. And if you want to build just basic office space, that's what it looks like. And by the way, they are cheaper. The U.S. Army built a 5-story, 300,000 square foot hotel in Alabama at one of their bases 2 or 3 years ago, simply because it was cheaper. They weren't trying to be green or climate friendly or anything. All of this stuff gets prefabricated, shipped to the site on a flatbed truck and bolted together, and it goes up a whole lot faster than steel or concrete. It weighs a lot less, so foundation costs are less. For a whole bunch of reasons, it just worked out better and was cheaper. So then there's straw bale construction. A favorite of mine. I've been studying it and writing about it, designing straw bale buildings forever. And as I like to say, it's an all-American invention that, just like democracy and jazz music, has spread all over the world now, all on its own merits, because people just love it. It makes so much sense. And we have some in Marin. This is a straw bale house in Mill Valley. And no, I won't tell you where, because it's somebody's home and they don't want to be visited. But straw bale building took off. It spread all over, well, it didn't spread anywhere 100 years ago, but now, with the revival that started 25 years ago, it's everywhere. But it's not going to change the world, because stacking up straw bales is a great way to make a single family home, but most people don't live there. We are building in the world right now the equivalent of another New York City every 35 days. Not here in Marin. It's over in Asia, it's in Africa, it's in South Asia, East Asia. They're going nuts, and they're mostly building with concrete. So if we could build with something a little less carbon intensive, that would be spectacular. Straw bale construction has led to a lot of innovation. People are making all sorts of products out of straw. This is my favorite. Ecologic is a company in Europe. They build all timber structures with all straw insulation. Their target is to use minimal fossil fuels. The whole building is net carbon positive. That is, the emissions from the building and its operation and its construction are net positive. It's absorbing more than it uses. And there's a number of other straw products. David started one. I gotta catch up with you about that. Straw building panels that are more or less just like what we call plywood or oriented strand board, with higher performance characteristics, as I recall, resistance to mold, structural strength, and so on. The construction industry is a hell of a market to break into. Really capital intensive. You got to put up a whole lot of money to get rolling, and then you got to penetrate a very, very dense and risk-averse industry. Nonetheless, it's got to happen, and it will happen. The blocks that you see in the middle there are a small startup that I'm part of that is currently sort of treading water, but basically Lego blocks made out of compressed straw that insulate really well and just stack up and very easy to use. Where else? Whoops. So hempcrete is another really promising one. The French invented this. They mix up lime with the herds from the hemp plant, not the pot plant, the hemp plant. And you can pack it into a wall, you can spray it, you can make blocks out of it, it insulates, it lasts, nothing will eat it or damage it or burn it. Wonderful stuff. It's all over Europe now, it's spread all over the place, it's all over Canada, it's just starting to enter the United States. And I think there are some hempcrete projects here in the area. But it's a wonderful product, and what makes it particularly interesting for us is that the hemp plant, of course, is a close cousin of the pot plant, and now we have all sorts of people growing marijuana because it's legal. And interesting thing is the hemp plant is mostly leaves and seeds, which are good for the hemp people because you can get the food and the oils and the food and everything else out of the hemp plant. Not that much fiber left from the stalk, which is what you build with. Cannabis, I'm told, by contrast, is mostly stems. This language coming back to some of you people, going back to stems and seeds and leaves. But the people who are growing cannabis to sell marijuana, they've got a whole bunch of product, all those stems, that they don't have anything to do with. And if we could find a way to turn them into building product, legal complications for sure, but it's a fabulous fiber. It's not just because it happens to be a weed and it grows really well. Engineering-wise, hemp and cannabis are better than any other plant. Microscopically, they have this aspect ratio. The fibers are really long, and it makes it very tough and very strong and very good to build with. So it's an opportunity waiting that I'm talking to everybody I can about this. Here's we can turn somebody else's byproduct into a really positive carbon sequestering building product. And I think that might be my last one. Oh yeah, I have to tell you about this because we have these two sort of wormholes available to you in the building community. We're trying to make it easy for people to do progressive things in Marin County, and I've been working with the chief building official, Bill Kelly, for many years now, serving on these two commissions. They're volunteer commissions staffed by members of the county. The Architectural Commission, the notion is take the whole idea of historical preservation and flip it around and looking forward, so that if you want to build something or do something in the built environment that is difficult because of some regulation or something in the building code or the planning code, but it's something that's really where we're going, composting toilets, renewable energy, earthen houses. You can start thinking of the possibilities that aren't there in the code or even restricted by the building code. You can come to the Architectural Commission and apply for the status of architectural significance. It's on the website. You can look at what all this means and how we define it. And if you get that, then suddenly the building official's hands are a little bit untied for giving you a permit. He's a progressive guy. He wants to support this stuff, but he has to follow the law. This gives you an avenue to basically relax the law a little bit. And then the Building Board of Appeals, a similar thing. If you have a conflict with the building department, you can come to us and say, we think this should be allowed, and the building department's saying, no, you can't, and we think it should, and here's our argument, and we can say, yes, we agree with you, on you go. Adjudication. So know that these things are here.
What's that picture?
That picture is from this very interesting guy, Ron Rael in the East Bay, professor in the architecture school at Cal. And he and his wife, partner, are doing all sorts of interesting things with 3D printing with non-plastic materials. That is salt. They're 3D printing buildings and all sorts of sculptural things with salt and sand and various waste products. And isn't it just a cool picture? And I'm done. Thank you.
David Warner, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi, my name is David Warner, and I grew up here in Marin. A fellow introduced me. But I think what I wanted to really talk about today is the intense amount of opportunity that we have in the Bay Area. And I'm one to get things done and not fiddle around and not listen to like normal entitlement processes. And if entitlement processes don't work here, they're going to work somewhere else. And so I wanted to give you a quick overview of my last probably 10 years. Which is not really based here in Marin, but it's based on many projects worldwide, where we've taken technologies. My slides aren't up. Where are they? Oh, they are. Look at them. Okay. So we'll see them. So what I ended up doing is that we got a really good reputation on integrating technology into building systems, and how do you make better buildings, and also then serve the people who need to be served. And so we ended up experimenting on a project in Kibera, which is inside of Nairobi, inside of Kenya. It's the largest urban slum in all of Africa. It's roughly around 500,000 people. And so these 4 pictures, and they all have an island typology to them, but this is the Kibera project, is on the lower left. And you'll see that our center is the blue streak on the bottom left. So in that center, we service right now 800,000 people in the last 4 years. We are standalone on sanitation system. We're standalone on PV systems and electrical. We're standalone. We have the second 3D printer in all of Kenya is here. We're teaching kids how to do 3D printing. We have moved 6,000 people into the workforce through our training centers. And it's actually 40% sustainable on its own marketplace for people buying those services. The people of Kibera, we trained them and they built that center. So from that moment, all of a sudden you start to think, well, how did they get all those technologies? Well, those technologies are available here. We use them every day, but I couldn't get them entitled here to use. We cannot take sanitation black water from our house and move it through our house through some filtration system which is available and reuse it for potable. Here we're doing it, and it's certified. It works, and we're now actually launched a company that's going to create an appliance to do it. Battery systems, as I think you said, $180 billion in batteries. We are now working with the Rockefeller Foundation on illuminating 2 miles of road inside of Kibera with light stanchions that were designed for the International Space Center. And they're being done with a graphene battery pack and a lithium battery pack. And at the bottom of those light stanchions, we have inductive charging stations for over 10,000 phones. So we don't have that here. You can't walk up to a light pole, stick your phone, and get it inductively charged. We're doing it here in the slum. So those kind of opportunities, for me, are where groundbreaking takes place. We're going to bring in the first, I think lithium is probably going to have a window here of about maybe another 10 years, and we're going to be moving into the world of graphene. Our first graphene test we took on the battery packs coming out of a Spanish company, Gorbat. We took it into a Tesla, 80% the weight, 40% the volume, drove it from here to Mexico back, and charged it in 20 minutes. So if you look at that as a paradigm, all of a sudden that battery storage is freeing loose the renewables that we all live with. The graphene solar panels, which we're experimenting on the roof in Africa, they don't know it. 2 foot by 2 foot powers a house of 2,000 square feet. So all of a sudden, we are now getting disenfranchised from our centralized grid concepts. And if we don't experiment, we're going to run into our biggest problem of climate change. And all these pictures have one common thing, it's about resiliency. So on Necker Island, we were involved in the energy grid there with UC Berkeley and Dan Kamen. And on Tetaroa, we installed the first SWAC system. SWAC is seawater air conditioning. Seawater air conditioning is 90% the consumptive than electrical standard air conditioning. And so and then SWAC got its launch here on Tetaroa, which if you don't know is Marlon Brando's island. And it's now the Tetaroa Societies, but there we were able to experiment with SWAC. We couldn't do that here. So where is SWAC here locally? Go to the Exploratorium. You can actually go to the invisible room in the Exploratorium and see SWAC. SWAC is now going to be the core of the air conditioning in Honolulu. They're going to be running chilled water through SWAC. So these systems think that you can't do it here, but we actually have been moving out of bounds to bring it back. And my game is really to be an integrator of finding the great stuff and bringing it to the people who need it the most, because the 3 billion people who live on less than $2 a day need it, not us as much, but they get the advantage of playing with that technology. And so on Necker Island, it was the same thing. We installed a new concrete mixes that were actually pushed back the original concrete mixes, and we're now saving 40% of the cost. And as you know, the hurricane swept through Necker Island, and the only thing that survived were our concrete mixes. So I am really happy that we're making effect and change. There's a brand new project that we've been invited to get involved with, which I don't know if you've heard about, is the Oakland Eco Block. And this is a combination of UC Berkeley, NASA, and Stanford. And it's going to take a community inside of Oakland off-grid. It's going to be transportation, food, water, energy, all in one shot. And the people are going to have a co-op. They're going to create a co-op to own all the shared infrastructure. And so I think where we're headed is to get away from centralized infrastructure to decentralized. The technologies are going to be there, and the advancements are really coming on. My last point was actually here in the room. I worked with Tom Flynn and Tom Willard on creating what we needed to find out about energy grid. Could wind be part of the MCE stable of green energy, right? Well, as you know, Marin is very, you can't change the ridges because of green power, you know? So we ended up, and Marin is locked up in most national park, state park, Marin County open spaces, and so on and so forth. So we went to 6 private locations in Marin to do our wind studies on. We had towers up for almost 2 years. The data that we collected, is it this one?
Yeah.
Pointed at the laptop, dude.
Oh, there we go. So we ended up, this map is the NREL map, which sort of indicates the value of wind in Marin County. The dark red is the hot spots. Obviously, Point Reyes is the place to go to if you want to harvest wind, but it's totally off limits. So if you look at the itty bitty red spots that are flanking through this corridor, we tested in those zones. And once we got done with our testing, and these are all class 3, class 4 winds, oops, sorry about that. We ended up, from our data, powering 2,000 homes consistently. So, and then at that same time, this is 2008, 2009, and 2010, we ended up actually helping WECs, the wind energy conversion codes, get adopted into the Marin County codes. Now, back then, you know, windmills have the 3-blade, the 3-prop program. There's new technologies that we're actually playing with on Mauritius and on another island in the Caribbean, a private island for a client, that is MIGLEV. And so all of a sudden, we're going to have a 1 megawatt windmill on MIGLEV that looks like a spinning drum. So it's elevated in a vacuum chamber. It has 0 resistance. It works on 10-mile-an-hour winds. And then all of a sudden, now that we've got WECs in place, the entitlement, we might have the technology in place, we might be able to assemble probably more than 2,000 homes. 2,000 homes represents, I think, a little over 10% of the homes in the city of San Rafael. So it's a sizable amount, and we didn't even do all the testing in all the areas. So that's sort of my story. I'm happy to talk to you guys, and I love the discussions. But my whole thing is, I love getting things done, and this EcoBlock project, you got to follow it because it's going to be a groundbreaker. Thank you very much.
Next up is Greg Thompson. Greg Thompson, Director of Community Microgrid Initiative for the Clean Coalition. His leadership on the Community Microgrid Initiative is an approach that proves a modern grid can support much higher levels of cost-effective renewable energy. In the wake of the fires that ravaged Sonoma in October, the Clean Coalition, a nonprofit that aims to accelerate the use of clean energy and technologies, is working to create community microgrids in the area. The project focuses on taking advantage of available commercial, industrial, and residential roof and parking space to site solar power. Also, community microgrids where they can provide power to critical services during outages. The project is spearheaded by the Clean Coalition with PG&E, Sonoma Clean Power, and organizations such as Rebuild North Bay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me to speak here today. Happy to be here. I am the person between all of you and lunch, so I know I have to be quick. There's a lot to cover, and I'll be fast through it. Getting through it, and happy to speak to any of you about it afterwards or later. This is now named the North Bay Community Resilience Initiative. It's not just about Sonoma, it's actually about Sonoma and Napa, the areas that were hit by the fires. And one of the themes that we've heard a little bit here is moving our energy infrastructure beyond just being centralized and being a little bit more decentralized, and that's a huge benefit. Energy is critical infrastructure, and it's costly, it's aging, it's inefficient, it is hit with extreme weather events, and it becomes very vulnerable, and it's a high cost to fix that. And we've seen that in things like Superstorm Sandy on the East Coast. We've seen it with Puerto Rico. We've seen it obviously here in the North Bay with the wildfires. Cyber attacks are another issue here. If you have a centralized architecture and you have a cyber attack, you can affect millions and millions rather than having a more decentralized architecture where you can have protection in each of those decentralized areas. So it's another thing we have to move beyond and into a much more secure and sustainable grid. And so to ensure both local and national security with the grid, we are looking at community microgrids. That's what we call them. You can call them also utility microgrids. There's, PG&E, and Joe is here today representing PG&E. They are very much involved in moving on to modern grids and how modern grids support communities. There are other projects around the country that where utilities are heavily involved in taking us to this next step. So we call it a community microgrid. It's in partnership with utilities. We do work with utilities. And we work with communities to bring this next phase of energy solutions to our world. So traditional microgrids, they focus on a single customer, a single campus, a single building. Community microgrids focus on a large area serving thousands of customers. And you can think of it essentially as substation areas where you can actually optimize loads. When those loads are used, we talked about the duck curve, for example. You can move loads to the daytime when there's a lot of solar. You can optimize how much energy is generated locally in sites like large commercial and industrial roofs and parking lots. And so MCE has their feed-in tariff program, for example, that helps that. And you can do that across large areas that benefits the whole community. Hello. All right, so why a community microgrid? So it brings 4 key benefits to communities: lower costs and increased economic investment. We heard about that today. Essentially, you reduce those peaks in the system, which have a lot of cost associated with them in terms of infrastructure and the energy you use, by having some amount, an optimal amount generated locally, used locally. It also increases local economic investment. You improve the performance of the system. You're not only replacing fossil fuels to improve sustainability, you're also improving the grid performance by taking those peaks out. And that's better outcomes, not only for the ratepayers and the communities, but for how the utilities operate the grid and how the Regional Balancing Authority, the California grid operator, CalISO, operates the grid. And then you're bringing resilience and security into communities, as I mentioned. And we also focus on trying to make this a very replicable and scalable model. So these aren't one-off microgrids. This is a design methodology and a system enabling this to be proliferate across communities. So an example of the benefits of a community microgrid or utility microgrid approach. If you get 30 megawatts of solar into a community on these optimal locations, which is the most cost-effective way to do it, large roofs, large parking lots, you can see the numbers here that benefit everyone. So you've got a lot of dollars spent locally in economic development. You have energy benefits in more spent on local energy systems versus remote. And then you have the environmental benefits, which are very clear. So now moving on to this particular initiative in the North Bay, the North Bay Community Resilience Initiative. Our objective there, like what's happened in Puerto Rico, where they brought together a bunch of experts to look at sort of the greenfield opportunity of Puerto Rico and how do you rebuild the grid, how do you rebuild right, is the word they use. And their conclusion is using local energy systems, using solar storage, grid modernization techniques, they can make energy, they want to make energy there abundant, affordable, resilient, and sustainable. And so we're taking that same approach, and our objective for the North Bay Community Resilience Initiative is to make energy more abundant, affordable, resilient, of course, and sustainable. So we have sort of 5 activities here. One is to rebuild the fire-destroyed areas with high levels of sustainability. That's looking at the homes, looking at the buildings, looking at the grid, having those things work together well. Energy efficiency, zero net energy, local generation, and grid modernization techniques. So we're building a more distributed and a more carbon-free system. And then establishing a blueprint for doing this in disaster areas, but also in other areas. So it's not just for rebuilding in places that have been hit by fires and storms, but what's the blueprint for doing this everywhere? And then having a model for how the distribution grid becomes operated in a modern way to support local energy systems and community microgrids. And then, of course, there's a lot in building codes that need to advance that a lot of experts here know about. And then essentially, at the end of the day, taking all these new technologies and these new systems and having a modern grid and modern energy systems for communities that end up lowering our costs as ratepayers. PG&E is involved and committed to this, as is Sonoma Clean Power, and I'll talk about the home project on this in a second. I was going to just quickly go through these slides because we're partners with PG&E on this, and it's really them who needs to represent their involvement. But essentially, they're in full support. They're doing their analysis on the grid to find out which locations make sense for these techniques for modernizing the grid, supporting these local energy systems for communities, and specifically helping Sonoma and Napa counties, the North Bay, in resilience efforts so that the grid itself can accomplish these goals that we've set out. So this is a point that many people in here know, but we essentially want to make sure that we have the rebuild effort for the homes that have been destroyed by the fires focused on saving money for the homeowners, for getting those homes rebuilt without a bunch of barriers because people lost their homes, but also helping do it right. So why not? We have an opportunity to do it right and build homes that are energy efficient and even zero net energy. And again, these are partners now to how the grid operates. And so we think about this as a whole system, a whole community system. And I'll get to these home packages in a second. So this slide is called the Advanced Energy Rebuild for Homes program. And this is something that Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E and others in the community have partnered together on to develop, and we'll be rolling out in next month. Essentially, it's an enhancement to PG&E's long-standing California Advanced Homes program. There's 2 incentive packages for the counties, and this is not just Sonoma, but it's also the other counties hit by the fires. And I'll talk about those here. So these are the packages for the homes that are going to be rebuilt for those who are rebuilding. Options here, option 1, the advanced energy home, or option 2, the all-electric home. There's a lot of details here, but essentially you're looking at making sure the homes are built with energy efficient envelopes, roofs, walls, as well as, and the second package, all-electric, and the option for solar and storage for either of those packages. And you can get these slides and look through the details. You can actually go to Sonoma Clean Power's website and you'll see these up there if you're interested in those details. And this initiative is kicking off. As I mentioned, there's a lot of analysis being done right now to determine what areas make sense for the grid side. Obviously, the areas that were hit by the fires, those homes are where these packages for the homeowners are being offered for that. There's a lot of people involved in this initiative. The Clean Coalition, I'm representing the Clean Coalition today. We're involved to help make sure that we have key stakeholders engaged, that we can convene those stakeholders, that we can help develop the plan for the community microgrid aspects of this and support the people up there, of course, especially PG&E and their role up there, as well as Sonoma Clean Power and then the other community leaders. Any questions about this, feel free to ask me afterwards or later. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. All right, what a great morning. Did you all learn something?
Yeah.
All this great innovation and persistence and resiliency. We got lunch for you. Yay. And I'm going to ask the speakers group to go first. I've got lunch for you because you're up. And we've got 2 rows to get you through, folks. We've got pick up a plate and some utensils right away on the speakers underneath that abstract picture. Get your plate. There's salad and chicken, and then there's another station on the left. So kind of 2 rows once you pick up your plates. Okay? So speakers group, please go first. Because you're special. Professionals. Currently, Gil is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Palo Alto. He's working on client moonshots there, some amazing initiatives. And so I wanted him to come up to Marin. He was CEO of Ecologic, which is a consultancy that helps companies and cities and agencies and organizations implement, measure sustainability strategies. And he's really considered by just about everyone as one of the co-founders of the sustainability movement. We're steeped in it now, but 30 or 40 years ago, it was not mainstream. And Gil was there out presenting and as a thought leader, and has been a tireless advocate of sustainable strategies and practices and policies. He was named an inaugural member of the Sustainability Hall of Fame by the International Society of Sustainable Professionals. He was named as one of the 10 most influential sustainability voices in America by the UK Guardian. He's served on Gavin Newsom's CleanTech Advisory Council, Executive Board of Open Eco, was twice named one of the Bay Area's top 25 movers and shakers in CleanTech. He is the author of probably my favorite book about green business. It's called The Truth About Green Business. And it's a Bible. It's 10 years old now, but I still use it. And I use it for all my classes at Sonoma State and other universities where I'm teaching. So it's just a great book. And so Gil holds an MS degree in systems ecology from Antioch, has a black belt in Aikido. You still practice? Are you still out there? And
I practice on the highway.
there you go. There you go. So please welcome Gil Friend.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks so much, Chris, for the kind introduction. Keep that in reserve. And I'm gonna break the humility on one thing. If I was one of the reasons you went to Presidio, you need to let them know. Shameless self-promotion and humility go together very nicely sometimes. Thank you.
So,
are we good on the mic?
yeah.
Can you hear me okay? All the way in the room?
No. Well, let's pump that up.
Okay, so I'll have to do it this way. Okay. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm inspired by what I've heard today. I was talking with a friend last night about coming here, and he said, "Oh, Marin, there's nothing sustainable about Marin." And so I'm really glad to see how wrong you have proved him, taking big ideas and bringing them to ground in really specific and practical ways here. So really kudos to you all for doing that. As Chris mentioned, I am Chief Sustainability Officer for Palo Alto, really a secondment for the last 4 years, but I'm not here as that. I'm taking that hat off. And I'm putting on my hat as Chairman of Natural Logic, which, as Chris said, is a strategy consultancy, typically retained by large companies who are already doing tremendously well on sustainability, and they come to us, typically sole source, and say, what do we do next? Where do we go from here? And so we work with Levi's, Hewlett-Packard, SunPower, Steelcase, and a bunch of other Odwalla folks who've been out on front in this game for a long time. And the question is, what next? And that's really what I want to talk with you about. I'm also chair of Gradient Capital, an emerging family of funds. We'll talk about that another time. And just very briefly, the greetings from the south, from Palo Alto, a small but mighty city that has the advantage of a full-service municipal utility, which we think is now the first carbon-neutral utility in the United States. We've neutralized our electricity 4 years ago, our natural gas happening now, and we're facing the challenge of what do we do with the 71% of our carbon footprint that is related to road transportation, which is critical because we have a commitment to get to 80% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030. We're 12 years out, and we need to take out most of that road travel emissions. So you've heard a lot from the transportation folks about that. We're in the grips of that now. You've had great speakers this morning, really good, solid detail about both emerging and on-the-ground technology, and I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk more about the technology, the business and humans in individuals and humans in human organization. And I'm not going to talk about the climate crisis because you know all about that. Right? That's for other audiences. I'm not going to talk about sustainability. I'm actually not a fan of sustainability. And don't get me started about corporate social responsibility. Again, a story for another time. So I'm not going to talk about how bad climate is and how good green business is. You all know that. But I am going to probably piss you off. And if not, I'm at least going to hopefully shake you up a bit in a way that will be productive and creative. Because look, you're flying into a shitstorm. Okay? We all of us are. We're in a time of enormous disruption, dislocation, and unpredictability in our country and in the global economy. Imagine that you're flying an airplane and you have zero visibility, and all of your instruments are on the fritz, and the crew is on the verge of mutiny. And in fact, you're flying blind into this storm, and in fact, we're living in an era of blindness. We're not paying attention to the physical reality that we live in. And we make all kinds of stupid mistakes as a result. And from a business perspective, we miss all kinds of business opportunities as a result. There's enormous opportunity in front of us for people who know how to look through the fog and discern it and organize on it and act on it. And yet there are ways to survive and thrive in the face of this uncertainty, in the course of which we're going to have to reinvent who we are and what we do. So let me start by exploring with you a little bit where we are now and where we might go with all this. People talk about the Anthropocene era. Have any of you heard that term before? You know about the Pleistocene, the ancient age of the dinosaurs and so forth. People talk about the Anthropocene as the geologic era in which anthropos, human beings, actually change the nature of the earth that we live in. We're in that now. And so the question is, how do we move here? How do we navigate the Anthropocene when it's profoundly uncertain, when we're dealing with not just the inescapable uncertainty of human existence, but the uncertainty of climate change, of massive shifts in the geopolitical alignments in the world. You see people on the news this last week saying Russia's our main enemy. I'm not so worried about Russia. China is going to take our cake. And as we have done, I don't know, half a dozen times in the last 40 years, we have invented whole industries and given them away to other countries. We're on the verge of doing that again. And I don't say this as a US chauvinist versus China, it's just the dynamics of the global economy, the vitality of the US economy, our ability to live well and move well depends on being able to continue to innovate and capitalize and harvest on the value of the innovations that we generate. And that's at risk now, as you all know. And so from a business perspective, there is the challenge of grappling with that risk and also fulfilling duty as business executives and board members to shareholders and other stakeholders. How many of you run companies? How many of you run not-for-profits, which are also businesses, right? You have budgets, you have staff, you have results you have to produce, you just don't pay shareholders. And so one of the challenges, we see this at public sector level and at corporate level, is how do you plan in the face of this enormous uncertainty? Traditionally we plan, this is I think worse in public sector, but there in business as well, we do what I call extrapolative planning. We look at what the past trends have been, we presume that they're going to continue forward, and we aim, maybe a year or two out, or maybe if you're really good, 5 years out, although the horizon should be a lot longer. But there's another approach, which the United States used in the Apollo mission in the early 1960s. You remember that in 1962, President John Kennedy declared internationally that the United States was going to land a man on the moon within 10 years and bring him back alive, an important part of the quote that's sometimes left out. We did it in 7. NASA didn't know how to do it. The technology was not in place. This was not one of those things where a leader says, I've got the program all built, I'm going to come announce it. He announced it and said, let's figure this out. And NASA did 2 remarkable things in the course of this work. Day 1, they held a victory party. They broke out the soda pop and popcorn in Houston Space Center and celebrated the successful moon mission to the moon and back. And day 2, they sat down and said, how did we do that? And they actually reverse engineered the moon mission. They looked at year 10. What had to happen in year 10 for this thing to work? What had to happen in year 9 for year 10 to happen? And they worked it backwards, like sometimes people do when you're solving a maze in the newspaper. This is what's called normative planning, looking at the result that has to be produced and figuring out how to produce it. Very different than saying, here I am now, I want to get somewhere over there, what are my first steps? Because sometimes you can't tell what the first steps should be when you're shooting for that big goal. So let me start with 3 things that I think that I'd like to talk with you about. To recognize 3 things. First of all, recognize that we're flying blind, and we don't stand a chance if we do that. Second, to recognize that the value streams of all of our businesses and economic systems are leaking value constantly. And there's an opportunity, if you can recognize and harvest that lost value, to prosper and have significant impact. And third is to recognize that purpose is the animating resource of business. And let me come back to each of those in turn. So I want us to recognize 3 things, to attend to 3 things, and to remember 3 things as we go through the next little bit. Like your other speakers, I'm going to talk fast. That's partly because I want to respect your time. I know we're over schedule, partly because I'm from New York City and I can't help it. So hopefully that'll work. So we're flying blind. You know that we're flying blind ecologically because we don't recognize ecological value on the balance sheets of our businesses. We have this bizarre concept called externalities, which are the things that economists choose not to measure and companies choose not to pay for. But in fact, we all pay for in our regular lives. The British research firm TrueCost did an analysis some years ago and determined that there is no industry on Earth that would be profitable today if it had to pay its ecological costs. Okay? So what do? Puma was one of the first companies that brought this into the business management system of the company, Puma, the shoe company. They built an ecological profit and loss statement that counted the value of climate, of water, of soil fertility, of biodiversity, added that up, looked at assets and liabilities on the balance sheet and determined that they were negative. And they did a very interesting thing. They could have said, okay, this is a nice academic exercise, it's not the real world, let's put it aside. They said, no, we're going to run this as an early warning system for our company. We recognize there's a differential between our financial management system and our ecological P&L, and that orients us to where the risks are now and where the risks are going to be emerging and where the future profit opportunities are. So think about that as you go. Hardly anybody is paying attention to those factors in their business. We're starting to see companies bring in an internal price of carbon. Microsoft was one of the first. There's now 400 companies that measure the value of, or the cost of greenhouse gas emissions internally, and in many cases build that into their performance management system so that Microsoft managers are bonused in part based on their greenhouse gas performance. And you know that it's one thing to say, I care about this deeply, but it's quite another to focus the activity of a manager on making something move in the direction you want to move it in. The problem goes deeper than the ecological blindness. 85% of publicly traded companies in the United States have a long-range strategic planning horizon of less than 5 years. 85% of them. 75% of companies have no metrics in their have no balance sheet or capital efficiency metrics in their long-term incentive programs. 85% of the S&P 500 has no disclosed line of sight process metrics that connect people's activity to future value. Some people like Jan Bauer are thinking about that, but mostly it's a desert out there. 30% of companies over 5 years had negative total return to shareholders and negative cumulative economic profit, but that's not what people are paying attention to. People are paying attention to quarterly capitalism. And there's a disjunction between quarterly capitalism and sustainable capitalism. Who cares about this? Well, if you're a publicly traded company, your shareholders do. If you're your own company, you do, or you will, because this is going to come and bite you. And it's a question of whether you wait till it bites you or whether you take proactive action to leverage your understanding to actually make a difference here. For those of you who are investors, you know that this is a rising trend in the investment world. There's something like $15 trillion under ESG, environmental and social governance management, among investment organizations around the world. Major pension funds are looking hard at these issues. And the emerging climate-related financial disclosure requirement, which we'll be seeing more about over the next year or two, is going to require companies and fiduciaries to disclose climate risk. And there's a big scramble going on in the background in the world now, figuring out how do we do that? How do we build that in, and what difference does it make? Are these just numbers to report, or do these become some of the drivers of transition strategies that you're going to see increasing shareholder resolutions around, coming to companies and saying, if you don't have a transition strategy to a low-carbon economy, you're violating your fiduciary duty to me as a shareholder. In fact, Mark Van Cleef is talking about going beyond fiduciary duty to strategic duty, asserting that directors and officers, and again, I'm using the language of big companies, but for small companies or family-held companies, it's you and your family who are the shareholders. Same deal. Are you fulfilling your strategic duty to make sure the value will grow and last in the dimensions that you care about? And you don't even manage your greatest asset. I'm not saying you don't manage it well. I'm betting you don't manage it at all. And we'll come to that in just a moment. Second, we need to recognize that our value streams leak. And let me tell you a story about one of our clients. One of these companies, stellar, truly impressive sustainability program, came to us and said, we need to reset. What do we do next? And we worked with them to build a strategy and then made this assertion about their value stream. They said, what do you mean? We said, let's get together for a couple of days, people from all across the company, every department, and map out your value stream. From cradle to grave, or cradle to cradle is the more common parlance, from the mine, digging up low-grade ores, refining them, creating metals, making product, storing product, painting product, shipping product, selling product, taking it back at end of life, all that stuff they did, and they did it impeccably well. And we asked the question of where is this value stream leaking? And people at first didn't understand, but then started to think and recognize, oh, like this is an efficiency question. So there's physical material that we're buying that's not making its way into a product on a shelf. It's actually going out to a landfill. We actually buy the material, spend a lot of time and money processing it, and we pay someone to take it away. That's a value leakage, right? Circular economy starts to address that. How do you start to both operate more efficiently so there's less waste, and also repurpose so-called waste into product? Using more energy than is necessary would be another kind of lost value, but then they started to think, wait a minute, what if we're not making the right sales propositions to our customers? What if we're missing sales because we're missing what our customers are expecting around these concerns? Or what if we're landing sales, but they're one-time sales and not 10-year relationship sales or lifetime sales? So we mapped this out over a couple of days. They mostly did with our guidance. And then the question, of course, is what's all this worth? And we, being good consultants, said, well, we're happy to figure that out for you. We'll just need certain data. And they said, no. No, you're not getting that data. I think it was partly that they just felt some of it was too sensitive and too confidential. And some of it was probably a suspicion that we would do an analysis and come back and pitch them on more work, which of course we would have done. So they said, no, we'll figure this out ourselves. And I said, great, would you be willing to let us know what you come up with? And they said, yes, we'll be happy to do that. And as we were leaving, we said, we predict this will be a large number. And they said, we'll see. We'll let you know. Go on, get out of here. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the global head of strategic planning for the $6 billion global manufacturing company.